Lucy Roberts held out the velvet purse with both hands, because one hand alone would have shaken too visibly. Snow melted on the brim of her bonnet and ran in cold threads along her jaw. Behind her, the tavern door stood half open, leaking firelight, pipe smoke, and the rough laughter of men who had not yet understood that a young woman's life could be purchased in ink before supper and ruined before dawn. Before her stood a stranger in a dark riding coat, tall enough to block the wind, still enough to make the night itself seem noisy. "Sir," Lucy said, forcing the word through lips gone numb, "there are 80 Spanish dollars in this purse, 2 Spanish pieces, and a ring that was my grandmother's. If you are unmarried, if you have a name that can be entered before a magistrate, and if you possess the courage to do a lawful thing quickly, I ask you to marry me tonight." The stranger did not take the purse. Across the yard, a groom looked up from fastening a harness. Somewhere inside the tavern a glass struck the floor and broke. Lucy did not turn. If she turned, she might see Nathan Cobb watching from the window with the smile he had worn when she arrived. Relieved, almost tender. Before he told her she had misunderstood everything. Before he admitted that he had sent the letters not to rescue her, but to hurry her into ruin. Before he said her mother had already signed enough paper to bind Lucy to a different man by morning. The stranger's eyes moved from the purse to her face. They were gray, not soft, not cruel. Measuring eyes, courtroom eyes. A man who noticed mud on hems, blood on cuffs, lies in polite voices. "Do you know what you are asking?" he said. "Yes. No woman knows that in a snowstorm, with her cloak torn and a deceiver still warm in the next room." Lucy's fingers tightened around the velvet. "Then I shall know it better than most by sunrise." For the first time, the stranger's expression changed. Not a smile, something sharper. Respect, perhaps, or anger placed carefully under glass. "What is your name?" "Lucy Roberts of Fairford Lane." "And who is the man you are running from?" "My mother's chosen husband for me is Silas Vane. The man in that tavern pretended to be my escape from him. They are partners." At the name Silas Vane, the stranger's jaw altered by the width of a thought. Lucy saw it. She had learned in the last terrible hour that survival depended on noticing what men tried to hide. "You know him," she whispered. "I know his paper." "Then you know why I must be married before he can place his contract before the court." The stranger looked toward the tavern window. Nathan Cobb had appeared there now, pale and furious, one hand braced against the glass. "Keep your gold, Miss Roberts," the stranger said. Lucy's breath failed. Then he stepped closer, removed one glove, and offered his bare hand. "I will marry you for the truth you just told in a yard full of liars. If this story has already pulled you into Lucy's dangerous choice, stay with her because the purse was only the beginning." The man who took her hand that night was not merely a stranger with a strong name. He was William Sterling of Ravensmere, a man who had spent 3 years tracing the signatures, debts, forged leases, and silent graves left behind by Silas Vane's schemes. And by the time the snow stopped falling, Lucy Roberts would no longer be anyone's bargain. 3 hours before she offered herself to a stranger, Lucy stood in her mother's parlor and watched her future placed on the tea table like an unpaid bill. The Roberts house on Fairford Lane had once been handsome in the modest way of families who owned good land, but never wasted coin pretending to be grandees. Its front steps were brick, its shutters green, its parlor chairs old but polished. In Lucy's childhood, there had been apples drying in the kitchen, her father's boots by the hearth, and her mother's voice singing accounts from memory as if numbers were hymns. After Mr. Roberts died of river fever, everything in the house became colder. The apples disappeared. The boots were sold. Mrs. Roberts stopped singing. She did not become cruel all at once. That was what made it harder to hate her. Poverty entered first as economy, then as embarrassment, then as doctrine. Mrs. Roberts learned to call fear prudence. She learned to call surrender realism. By the winter Lucy turned 22, her mother could look at her only daughter and see not a soul, not a mind, not the child who had once fallen asleep over hornbook lessons, but a remaining asset requiring placement before value declined. Silas Vane arrived at 4 o'clock with snow on his shoulders and a black leather document case beneath his arm. He was not handsome. He was worse. Handsome men invited suspicion. Silas was tidy, well-spoken, unremarkable, in a way that made magistrates trust him and widows answer his letters. He had brown hair brushed flat, a mouth trained for sympathy, and eyes that never rested on anything without pricing it. "Miss Roberts," he said, bowing. "I hope the weather has not chilled your spirits." Lucy looked at the leather case. Not yet. Her mother's warning glance cut across the room. Silas smiled as if Lucy had made a charming joke, a lively answer. "I admire liveliness when it is guided by good sense." Lucy sat because remaining standing would have looked childish, and she had promised herself long ago that even if men spoke of her as property, she would not behave like furniture. Mrs. Roberts poured tea with hands that did not shake. "Mr. Vane has been generous, Lucy. More generous than our position deserves." "Our position," Lucy said, "has grown very popular today. Everyone speaks of it except me." Silas opened the case. "Then let us include you." He laid the papers out one by one. A marriage agreement. A transfer of the eastern meadow as security against Robert's debts. A clause assigning management of Lucy's small inheritance to her husband upon marriage. Another clause, dense and slippery, describing obligations her mother had allegedly accepted in return for advances made during Mr. Roberts's illness. Lucy read quickly. Her father had taught her, before fever took him, that any paper a man urged you to sign should be read twice and distrusted once. "This says my mother received $480 from you over 9 months, Lucy said. "She did," Silas replied. Mrs. Roberts looked at the teapot. "This says failure to complete the marriage permits seizure of the orchard lot." A harsh phrase for a practical matter. "This says my consent is presumed upon acceptance of household support." Silas folded his hands. "You have lived beneath your mother's roof while those advances preserved it. I did not know they existed. Few daughters know the full cost of protection." Lucy looked to her mother then, not for rescue. She had grown past that hope. She looked for one human fracture. Shame, grief, regret, anything. Mrs. Roberts lifted her chin. "Your father left us with sentiment and no money. I have done what was necessary. You sold me. I secured you. To a man who writes consent into debt. To a man who can keep a roof over you when beauty fades and defiance feeds no fire." The words landed with the dull familiarity of stones dropped into a well. Lucy had heard versions of them all winter. Be sensible. Be grateful. Women do not choose. They negotiate the terms of being chosen. Yet hearing them beside Silas Vane's papers changed them. They were no longer her mother's bitterness. They were machinery. Silas slid a final page forward. "Your signature would simplify matters. We can proceed with dignity tomorrow." Lucy did not touch the pen. "I have been corresponding with Nathan Cobb," she said. Her mother stiffened. Silas blinked once. Only once. The clerk from Wexley's shipping office. He asked me to meet him tonight. He says he has found irregularities in your claims. That young man has debts and theatrical impulses. He says he loves me. Silas's smile returned, thinner now. Men say many things to women they believe are desperate. Lucy stood. Then I shall discover which of you is lying. Her mother rose, too. Lucy, sit down. No, It was the first clean no she had spoken in that house. It rang strangely. Even the fire seemed to pause. Mrs. Roberts crossed the room and gripped Lucy's wrist. If you walk out that door, you will not come back as my daughter. Lucy looked at the hand holding her. It was the hand that had braided her hair, cooled her forehead, counted coins until dawn. It was also the hand that had signed her away. If I stay, Lucy said, I may not come back as myself. She pulled free, took her cloak, and left before fear could learn to speak louder than outrage. Nathan's letter had told her to come to the Kingfisher Tavern beyond the North Road, where the bridge crossed a frozen tributary of the James. He had written in urgent strokes, I have proof. Come alone. If you wait until morning, Vane will close the trap. Lucy had believed in him because believing him gave shape to escape. The road out of Fairford narrowed between black hedges and sleeping fields. Snow thickened until the world became a page being erased. Twice she nearly turned back. Twice she remembered Silas's clause about presumed consent and walked faster. At the tavern, Nathan met her not with an embrace, but with a glance over her shoulder. You came alone? Yes, good, good. He led her to a small room off the main taproom. His hands were damp. He would not meet her eyes for more than a heartbeat. Where is the proof? Lucy asked. There has been a complication. The sentence was a blade wrapped in cloth. Nathan poured brandy he did not drink. He told her then, in fragments, the truth. He had worked copying cargo bonds for Silas Vane. He had seen names repeated across debt contracts. Widows, small farmers, mill owners, men who had lost sons in fever season and daughters to convenient marriages. He had planned to sell Lucy information, then became fond of her letters, then frightened. Silas discovered the correspondence. Rather than expose Nathan's theft from the shipping office, Silas offered him a bargain. Lure Lucy away from home, compromise her reputation, and make her more desperate to accept the marriage agreement by morning. You were to ruin me into obedience, Lucy said. Nathan wept. It made him look younger, not better. I meant to warn you tonight. Truly, Lucy, I meant, but you waited until I was here. I did not know how to get out. Lucy felt something inside her become very quiet, not empty, quiet, like a room after a door has been barred. Give me the papers. I cannot. Because you do not have them? Because Vane does. And he is coming. That was when she heard horses in the yard. Lucy moved before Nathan could stop her. She snatched her reticule, fled through the side passage, and found herself outside in the snow among wagons, barrels, and a black carriage whose lamps burned steady against the storm. Beside that carriage stood the stranger. William Sterling had not planned to marry anyone that night. He had come to the Kingfisher Tavern under another name, carrying 3 warrants folded inside his coat and a patience sharpened by years of watching. Lawful predators feed beneath respectable roofs. Ravensmere was not a title in the old world sense. It was a name older than many county offices, a river estate, a set of mills, shipping interests, tenant farms, and a reputation for paying debts cleanly and collecting proof slowly. Men called William Sterling formidable because they did not know what else to call. a man who spoke softly and ruined frauds thoroughly. Silas Vane had troubled him long before Lucy Roberts stumbled into the yard. At first, it was one widow near Ravensmere Creek who lost her dairy lease after signing a loan she could not read. Then a ferryman whose daughter married a creditor twice her age. Then a carpenter found drowned after claiming that certain cargo bonds bore copied signatures. Each case looked private, unfortunate, legally tidy. Together they formed a map. William had been waiting for Nathan Cobb because fear made clerks talk. He found Lucy instead, snow-covered, humiliated, furious, and honest enough to describe her disaster without decorating it. A foolish man would have seen a scandal. William saw a witness with courage no training could manufacture. The magistrate lived 2 miles farther east, roused from bed with a candle in one hand and suspicion in the other. Lucy expected questions that would break her. Instead, William gave answers before they were asked. His full name, his residence, his age, his unmarried state, his willingness, his awareness that the lady consented under urgency, but not under his coercion. Lucy added her own statement in a voice that grew steadier with every sentence. I marry to prevent an unlawful presumption of consent being used against me. I have not been promised money or shelter by Mr. Sterling beyond what marriage law creates. I have offered him money and he has refused it. I understand the consequence. I choose this consequence over the contract prepared without honest consent. The magistrate stared at her over his spectacles. William's mouth almost curved. The ceremony lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Lucy Roberts became Lucy Sterling by law, though neither of them pretended law had yet made them anything else. Outside, William helped her into his carriage. He did not touch her more than necessary. That restraint, after a day of hands trying to direct, grip, claim, and sign for her, nearly undid her. What happens now? She asked. Now. William said, Silas Vane discovers that he tried to purchase a woman who had already removed herself from sale. And after that, Mrs. Sterling, we decide what you want to do with the truth. No one had asked Lucy that before. By morning, Fairford Lane knew. By noon, 3 versions of the story had overtaken the truth and improved upon it badly. Lucy had eloped with a gambler. Lucy had been abducted by a northern speculator. Lucy had trapped William Sterling with tears and gold. Mrs. Roberts shut her shutters. Silas Vane filed a petition claiming fraud, coercion, and prior contractual obligation. William read the petition at breakfast in Ravensmere's library, while Lucy sat opposite him in a borrowed blue morning gown, her own clothes drying near the kitchen fire. Ravensmere was not grand in the glittering way Lucy had imagined wealth. It was severe, river-facing, built of pale stone and dark timber, with shelves of ledgers beside shelves of Greek histories, maps pinned under glass, and windows that admitted the winter light without apology. Will he succeed? Lucy asked. No. The certainty should have comforted her. Instead, it irritated her. Because you are powerful. William looked up. Lucy held his gaze. Forgive me. I have had enough of men treating law as a private door only they can open. He set the petition down. Because the statute does not permit a private debt agreement to force marriage after a lawful marriage has occurred. Because your mother's signature cannot substitute for yours. Because Vane's clause relies on concealment. And because we will prove a pattern of concealment beyond your case. We, if you wish it. Lucy studied him. And if I do not, then I defend the marriage long enough to secure your legal freedom. Arrange separate residence if you prefer. and leave Vane to the Attorney General with the evidence I already possess. It was said without bitterness. That made it harder to distrust. Lucy looked toward the window. Snow lay over the fields like a clean sheet, hiding old stains. I want to know how many families he has done this to. William nodded once. Then we begin with the names. The work did not feel heroic. It felt cold, repetitive, and often sickening. For 10 days, Lucy sat with William and his steward, Mr. Vale, comparing debt books, marriage notices, land transfers, and shipping bonds. She learned how Vane's machine operated. A household under strain received advances through a friendly intermediary. The debt papers included clauses most borrowers did not understand. A daughter, widow, or niece became the convenient solution. Marry her into a creditor's circle, transfer land, quiet dispute, preserve reputation. If anyone protested, a clerk produced copied accounts. If anyone threatened court, a rumor damaged them first. The first 3 days taught Lucy that villainy rarely entered a house in boots. More often, it arrived as advice. A farmer from Elk Run came with his hat crushed in both hands and swore he had signed only a seed note, not a transfer of his lower pasture. His eldest daughter stood behind him, 16, silent, already promised to Vane's cousin as payment. A mill widow brought a receipt with the ink deliberately watered, so the amount could be altered after drying. A schoolmaster produced copies of attendance rolls showing 2 girls removed from lessons within a week of their fathers receiving advances from Vane. Lucy listened until listening became a discipline. She learned not to gasp when another cruelty appeared. She learned to ask the next question. Where did you sign? Who witnessed? What phrase did they use to persuade you? Was there a pamphlet? Was there a visitor before the paper arrived? At night, when anger threatened to scatter her thoughts, William would place another log on the library fire and ask only, "What did you notice that I did not?" At first, she thought it politeness. Then she realized he meant it. He noticed seals, dates, handwriting, jurisdiction. Lucy noticed shame-changing posture. She noticed when a witness used a phrase not natural to him. She noticed when mothers defended their own participation too quickly, as if reciting from an invisible page. She noticed that daughters who had supposedly consented never used the word choice when describing their engagements. They said, arranged, settled, managed, spared. One evening, after a tenant woman left Ravensmere weeping into her apron, Lucy remained by the window long after the carriage lamps vanished. "I used to think courage was leaving," she said. William stood several paces away. "And now? Now, I think leaving is sometimes only the moment fear changes rooms. Courage is what one does after." He did not answer quickly. That was one of the first things she came to trust about him. He did not use speed as proof of wisdom. "My father used to say," William said at last, "that a house is not saved when the fire goes out. It is saved when someone decides what must be rebuilt and what must never be rebuilt again." Lucy looked at him then, really looked. Beneath the severity was fatigue, and beneath the fatigue a grief she had not been invited to examine. "Is that why you hunt men like Vane?" A shadow moved across his face. "My sister married under a property agreement no one read closely enough. By the time I understood the trap, she had already learned to call misery duty. Did she survive it?" "Yes." He looked down at the papers. "But survival is a poor thing to offer as justice." The confession altered the room. It did not make William softer. It made his hardness legible. For the first time, Lucy understood that he had not taken her hand from abstract nobility. He had recognized the edge of an old wound and refused to watch another woman be pushed over it. The next morning, Lucy found the first key because she recognized shame. "These three women," she said, pointing, "Mercy Bell, Ann Cotter, Sarah Pike, their mothers all signed statements saying the girls were willful, unstable, or ungrateful." William leaned closer. "That language appears in many petitions. It is not legal language. It is maternal language turned into a weapon." He watched her, waiting. "My mother did not invent her phrases. Someone taught frightened parents to call surrender prudence. They traced the wording to a pamphlet printed anonymously in Williamsburg on the preservation of distressed households. It advised families to avoid scandal by placing daughters advantageously before creditors forced public seizure. Beneath its moral language lay instructions for coercion. The printer remembered the man who paid cash for 500 copies. Nathan Cobb. Nathan, when brought to Ravensmere under threat of warrant, looked as if guilt had eaten the bones from his face. Lucy insisted on questioning him herself. William did not object. He stood near the hearth, silent. Lucy placed Nathan's letters on the table. "You used tenderness as a road sign to a trap." Nathan covered his mouth. "I do not ask whether you are sorry. Sorry is what weak people offer when truth becomes expensive. I ask what you carried for Vane, where you carried it, and whose names are in the locked ledger." He stared at her. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had prepared for accusations. He had not prepared for precision. "The ledger is at Millcross," he whispered, "in Vane's counting room. Red cover, brass clasp. It has payments to magistrates, clerks, printers, witnesses, and marriage contracts. More than yours." "Who keeps the second key?" Nathan hesitated. Lucy let silence do the work. "Mrs. Roberts," he said. The room seemed to tilt. William took one step forward, then stopped. He understood already that rescue, at the wrong moment, can become theft. Lucy folded the letters carefully. "Send for my mother." Mrs. Roberts arrived at Ravensmere in the same black gown she had worn the night Lucy fled. She looked smaller in William's library, though not softer. Her eyes went first to Lucy's plain wedding band, then to William, then to the table where copies of contracts lay arranged. "I see you have made yourself comfortable," she said. "I have made myself difficult," Lucy replied. "There is a difference." Mrs. Roberts's face tightened. Lucy held out her hand, the key. For the first time, her mother looked afraid. Silas Vane's genius had been understanding that respectable people will do terrible things if first convinced they are, avoiding worse ones. Mrs. Roberts had not begun as his accomplice. She had begun as his debtor, then as his example. He used her parlor for meetings with other distressed parents because she could say, with a widow's authority, what he could not: that daughters must be practical, that love was a luxury, that survival required sacrifice. Each family she persuaded reduced her own debt. "How many?" Lucy asked. Mrs. Roberts sat down as if her knees had finally received news her pride had concealed. "I did not know at first." "How many?" 11 households. Lucy closed her eyes. "I told myself they would marry somewhere. Everyone marries somewhere." "You told yourself a sentence small enough to hide in." Her mother flinched. "I was alone," Mrs. Roberts said. "Your father left us with nothing but his good name." "No. He left us with land, books, and neighbors who would have helped if you had not been ashamed to ask. Vane taught you to fear embarrassment more than injustice. And you think courage feeds a household?" "No," Lucy said. "But cowardice has been feeding his." Mrs. Roberts wept then, not prettily. not enough to erase anything. She gave Lucy the key. The raid on Millcross happened 2 nights later, after Lucy made the discovery that turned suspicion into a warrant. The red ledger itself was not enough, William warned her. Courts liked patterns only when tied to a particular crime. Vane's public papers were clean enough to survive outrage. They needed proof of deliberate manufacture, a forged witness, a paid clerk, a document altered after signature. Lucy found it in the fold of her own marriage agreement. Not the one William had witnessed, the one Vane had prepared. She had read it before fleeing, but she had read as a trapped daughter, searching only for exits. Now she read as a woman trained by 10 days of other people's ruin. In the margin beside the orchard clause was a faint grain of sand, red rather than brown, caught in wax that sealed a copied schedule. She had seen that same red sand earlier in a receipt from Millcross, where the counting room floor was swept with crushed brick to absorb damp. This page was not prepared at Fairford, she said. He brought it from Millcross already sealed, but told my mother the schedule had been copied from her accounts. William leaned over the page. Their shoulders almost touched. Neither moved away. "You are certain?" "I am certain enough to ask why a man carries a sealed copy of a widow's private account from his counting room before she has supposedly approved the agreement." By afternoon, Mr. Vale had matched the wax impression to 2 other altered schedules. By evening, the sheriff had what he needed. The raid on Millcross happened 2 nights later. William could have gone without her. He did not. Lucy rode beside him in a closed carriage while sheriff's men followed at a distance. The snow had hardened to ice along the road. Every wheel jolt struck her ribs. "You need not enter," William said. "I know." That was not dismissal. "I know that too." At Millcross, Vane's counting room smelled of ink, damp wool, and coal smoke. Silas stood behind his desk with a pistol he did not quite know how to hold and the expression of a man offended by consequences. "Sterling," he said, "this is trespass." William handed the sheriff the warrant. Vane's eyes shifted to Lucy. "And you bring your purchased wife to witness it?" Lucy stepped forward before William could answer. "I purchased nothing. I paid nothing. That is what enrages you, Mr. Vane. You understand every bargain except the one made by choice." Vane laughed. "Choice? You ran from your mother to a clerk, from a clerk to this man, and call the last handcuff liberty because it is polished." The words were clever. They found the bruise. Lucy felt them enter. Then she felt something steadier behind them. 10 days of ledgers, names, signatures, mothers crying in kitchens, William's silence making room for her own mind. "If this ring becomes a handcuff," she said, lifting her left hand, "I will break it too. But today it is evidence that your paper failed." William's eyes met hers across the room. There was pride there, controlled and unmistakable. The red ledger was in the locked lower drawer. Lucy opened it with her mother's key. Inside were names enough to change the county. The hearing drew every family Vane had ever frightened, and several he had not yet reached. The courthouse smelled of wet wool, lamp oil, and expectation. Lucy stood not behind William, not beside him as ornament, but at the witness table, with the red ledger open beneath her hand. Silas Vane's attorney tried to make her seem impulsive. "You fled your home at night." "Yes." "You proposed marriage to a stranger." "Yes." "You admit desperation." "I admit danger." Desperation is what trust Vane manufactures and then calls consent. A murmur moved through the room. The attorney tried tenderness next. "Were you not influenced by Mr. Sterling's wealth?" Lucy looked toward William. He stood near the rail, expression unreadable to everyone but her. She remembered the yard, his refusal of the purse, his question, "What do you want to do with the truth?" "I was influenced," she said, "by the first man that night who did not ask what I was worth to him." Nathan testified. Then the printer. Then Mercy Bell, whose marriage contract had taken her father's mill. Then a ferryman's widow. Then Mrs. Roberts. Her mother's testimony broke the room more than Lucy expected. "I called it prudence," Mrs. Roberts said, voice thin but clear. "I called it protection. I let Mr. Vane teach me words that made betrayal sound maternal. My daughter did not dishonor me by running. She revealed what I had become." Lucy did not forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness was not a curtain to drop because an audience needed closure, but she saw, through anger, the outline of a future in which truth might do more than punish. Vane was taken into custody before sunset. His contracts were suspended pending review. The seized lands did not return at once. Law mends slowly, especially where profit has taught it to limp, but the machine stopped. Families who had whispered alone began speaking together. Women whose names had been used as solutions became witnesses. That evening, Lucy returned to Ravensmere, exhausted enough to feel hollow. She found William in the library, not celebrating, but sorting copies for the next petitions. "You won," he said. "We stopped him. That is often what winning looks like when decent people are involved." Lucy removed her gloves. "What happens to us now?" It was the question they had both avoided, because danger had been easier than tenderness. William closed the ledger. "I will not hold you to a marriage made under emergency. I know. I can arrange a legal separation once the court confirms there was no coercion from me. You may have funds sufficient to live independently, not payment. Restitution for what this alliance cost you." Lucy smiled faintly. "You are very careful when afraid." He went still. She stepped closer. "Do not look so alarmed, Mr. Sterling. I have spent weeks studying men who hide greed under principle. It has made me attentive to a man hiding feeling under fairness." His breath changed. "Only that." "I am trying," he said, "not to become another person deciding your life while praising myself for protecting you. And I am trying not to mistake every offered hand for a chain." Between them lay the whole strange road from snow to law, from bargain to trust. Lucy touched the velvet purse, now resting on his desk, where he had placed it the morning after their marriage. Untouched, refused, witness. "I do not know yet what love is when it is not escape," she said. "Nor do I, but I would like to learn slowly. Here, if you are willing, not as your rescued wife. No, as your partner." William came around the desk, stopped before her, and offered his hand just as he had in the tavern yard. This time there was no storm, no window full of betrayal, no purse between them. Lucy took it because she chose to. Spring came late to Fairford that year. When the thaw opened the roads, Lucy found a small office in the old Roberts Apple Room, where women and families could bring papers before signing them. William sent clerks to copy documents, but Lucy did the first reading whenever she could. She had learned the particular music of traps, the soft phrase, the presumed consent, the friendly debt, the clause that turned need into surrender. Mrs. Roberts came once a week to help keep accounts. She and Lucy spoke carefully at first. Some mornings there was only work between them, and work was mercy enough. Forgiveness, Lucy discovered, was not a door flung open. It was a hinge tested over time. Nathan Cobb left the county after giving full testimony. Silas Vane's name remained in court records, stripped at last of the tidy respectability he had worn like a clean collar. At Ravensmere, Lucy's room stayed her own by her insistence and William's understanding. Their marriage grew not from the ceremony, but from 100 chosen continuations. Breakfast arguments over petitions, rides to tenant farms, laughter over William's terrible habit of annotating newspapers, quiet evenings, when he read aloud, and she corrected his dramatic voices without mercy. 1 year after the night at the Kingfisher Tavern, snow began falling again. Lucy stood with William at the edge of the orchard lot that had nearly been taken as payment for her obedience. Young girls from Fairford were hanging lanterns for a winter supper, their voices bright in the dusk. Her mother watched from the porch, older now, softer in ways grief had earned rather than performed. William slipped the velvet purse into Lucy's hands. "I believe this is yours." She weighed it, smiling. "You never did take my offer." "No. Why?" He looked toward the lanterns, the house, the road beyond, and then back at her. "Because you were not asking to be bought. You were asking whether one honest choice could interrupt 100 dishonest ones. And could it?" William's smile came slowly. "You tell me, Mrs. Sterling." Lucy opened the purse and poured the gold into a wooden box marked for the Fairford Relief and Council Fund. The coins struck the bottom one by one, bright and final. "I think," she said, "one honest choice is only the beginning." Then she took his arm. Not because winter was hard, though it was. Not because the law named him her husband, though it did. But because partnership, unlike purchase, did not lessen her when she leaned into it. Together they walked back toward the lanterns, leaving behind them a path in the snow that belonged to no contract, no mother's fear, no man's design. It belonged to the woman Lucy had chosen to become.